Good morning. Today is Sunday, Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of the month of Elul. Yesterday, Shabbos, was the first day of Rosh Chodesh, the 30th day of Menachem, which is the first day of Rosh Chodesh. And today, we begin with the sounding of the shofar. Sounding of the shofar reminds us Rosh Hashanah is coming. And as the Alter Rebbe says, a month of Elul, the king is in the field, God is close to us, is approachable, and the sound of the shofar is a wake-up call that wakes us up. So let us start with the sounding the shofar, and we'll get to the Tanya Shir momentarily. Siva v'chasima teva, Hashem bless each and every one of us, v'teich kol Am Yisrael, a good year, happy year, Shana Tova Mesukah, a sweet new year. And let's begin the Tanya, which today we are in the second part of letter 10 that started yesterday on Shabbos. And again, we're going to start, being that we didn't record yesterday, we're going to start with the shir, the lesson of yesterday, and then we'll continue today's lesson. And this letter, if you need to take a wild guess, what is the topic of the letter? And if you say tzedakah, charity, you would be right. Most of these letters, the Alter Rebbe talks about the importance of charity, taking it from different angles. And in this letter, letter 10, Alter Rebbe addresses the fact that when it comes to giving tzedakah, there is no limits. And there is a reason why we give today without limits. And when we're saying without limits, it means that we're not, even according to the Torah, there is certain limitations how much you should give. Do not give more than 20%. But yet Alter Rebbe explains how it is important to give also beyond those limitations. And we're going to, as the Alter Rebbe's style of explaining something is going into the depth to explain the deeper meanings of everything. And this is no exception in this letter. Alter Rebbe goes into the depth of why we need go beyond limits, and explains because we need to draw from Hashem the limitless kindness of Hashem. And we're going to go explain as we go along reading the letter. So let's begin with the shir of yesterday, Shabbos, which was the 30th day of Menachem, the first day of Rosh Chodesh. Says the Alter Rebbe, Acharei drishas shloimom v'chaim, after greeting of life and peace, Pesach dvora yoyer oizen sheimas teichachas chaim. May my opening words rouse the ear that hears the life-giving admonition. Asher oichiach Hashem chaim al yedei nevioi, that the living God admonished through his prophet here is Jeremiah, saying, Chasdei Hashem kilei samnu, the kindness of God have surely not ended. The Rebbe points out that the Alter Rebbe stresses in the beginning of the letter and at the end of the letter that this was said through the prophet. And that is because when something is said through a prophet, then it is words that carry certainty. Words that a prophet uttered is something that becomes certain. It is certain that it will be fulfilled, especially when we're talking about a good thing, a positive thing. So here it says, the prophet says, the kindness of God have surely not ended. So the Alter Rebbe, number one, is asking a question here, and the wording in Hebrew. When you want to say Hebrew, something is not ended, you say kilo tamu. Here it says chasdei Hashem kilo tamnu with a nun. Tamu means them ended. Tamnu means we are not ended. And that's the question he's asking. Now it should have really said kilo tamu. And he brings an example, the way we say in davening, kilo samu chasadecha. As in the phrase, for your kindness have not ended. So, question in Hebrew, in the language that is used, that the prophet used. And the Rebbe is going to go in, as usual, in deeper meanings of all of this. What does that mean? It says, the Alter Rebbe, v'yuvan al pi ma shekosu b'zoyar HaKodesh. And this anomaly will be understood in the light of a statement in the Holy Zohar. It says, is chesed ve'is chesed. There are two different types of chesed, two different types of kindness. Is chesed olam. There is chesed olam, literally a world-like kindness, a degree of kindness which is limited by temporal bounds. There is chesed ilah v'hu rav chesed v'chulu. And there is a superior form of kindness. It's called rav chesed, which means boundless kindness. To understand this, the Alter Rebbe goes in explaining with what is the Torah. We know we explained a number of times that in Hashem's world there is the right side and there is the left side. The right side is kindness, the left side is restriction, gevura, strength. Kindness is about flowing down, giving. Restriction is about restricting the flow. Says the Alter Rebbe, when it comes to Torah, it seems like, on the one hand, we find the Torah is restricting and strength, and yet on the other side, we find the other way around. So here, it says like this. Now, it is well known that the Torah is called Oz, which means strength. Thus, in the verse, God grants to his people, Hashem Oz Lama Yitain. The Gemara instructed the Zavachim comments, strength alludes to the Torah. Hashem Oz Lama Yitain. Hashem gives strength to the people, to his people. The Gemara says this refers to Torah. It gives us the Torah. The Torah is strength, Shulashim Gevura, which is an expression of Gevura. As our sages of blessed memory taught, Taryag mitzvahs nemru leMoshe misinai mipi agevura. The Talmud says that the 613 commandments were declared unto Moshe at Sinai from the mouth of Gevura. Gevura refers to Hashem, but Gevura again means the strength, the attribute of Gevura, the attribute of restriction. And another example he brings, about the Torah. This is a verse in the Torah itself. It says, it is likewise written, from his right hand the Torah of fire was given unto them. Meaning, it was written in fire, which is an expression of the attribute of Gevura. And again, water represents chesed that flows down, The fire represents the strength, the restriction that goes up. Pirush, so the Alter Rebbe now goes to explain, so which one is it? On the one hand, we say the Torah is chesed. Torah we know compared to water, because Torah is about giving the flow of Hashem down to this world. And in that very verse that we just read also, if you see, mi yaminoi eish das lamei, it comes from his right side, in his right hand. And we just explained the right side of Hashem represents chesed, kindness, and yet here we say it is eish, it is gevura. So which one is it? So the Alter Rebbe explains, and it says, "Sha'Torah mekoiro v'sharosho urak chasdei Hashem hamechunim b'shem yamin." The source and root of Torah is solely God's kindness, that are referred to as the right side. Da'ainu amshochas b'chinas elokusei yisborech ve'or me'irin soibochu. This, that is, the elicitation of his divinity and of the radiance from the infinite Ein Sof light to the upper and lower worlds. And how is it done? How do we draw down Hashem's kindness, Hashem's light through the Torah? Says the Alter Rebbe, Al Yedei Adam Hamamshich Oir Al Atzmai. And this is done, it is affected by man who draws down the light upon himself. How do we do it? Bekiyum Ramach Mitzvahs Esse Shem Ramach Evorim de Malka, by the fulfillment of the 248 positive commandments, which are the 248 organs of the king. This we explained earlier in the Tanya, that the mitzvahs are considered the organs of the king, the organs of God. And why is that? Why is the mitzvah compared to an organ? Because if you think about what is the definition of an organ, what does an organ do? I have a hand, I have a nose, I have eyes. What does an organ do? What defines an organ? An organ expresses and draws the soul the way the soul wants to express itself. A hand that draws a picture, it draws the art, talent that the soul has. You want to see, you want to look at things, you want to smell. It is things that, so the organ draws down the soul itself. And that is the same thing is also with the mitzvahs of the Torah. Every mitzvah draws down a different light of Hashem, the godly light in this world. This is God's will, the way Hashem placed himself in the Torah through the mitzvahs. And he expressed his will through those mitzvahs, through those commandments. Continues the Alter Rebbe. Pirush. Ramach kelim ulevushim le'ore me'oirin soiboruchu hamelubish behem. Meaning they are the 248 vessels and garments for the radiance from the infinite Ein Sof light that is vested in them. And as is known from this light, awe and love are drawn down upon a person as he performs each command. So that is the chesed part. That is the kindness, the drawing down Hashem's light through the Torah, through the mitzvahs. However, this chesed needed to be also confined, constricted, and limited. Why? Because we are limited beings. And in order for us to contain the great light of Hashem, it needs to come in forms of restrictions as well. And that is why the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain that all of the mitzvahs, almost all of the mitzvahs have limitations. The commandments, they have limitations. It says, Rak sham shocha zu nislapshot chila b'midas gvurosei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu hamechuna b'shem Eish. However, this downflow was first vested in God's attributes of gevura. The gevura is the restriction, which is referred to as fire. Shehi b'chinas tzimtzum ha'oiv ha'chayus hanimshochos me'oir ensoif Baruch Hu, and which reflects a contraction, a tzimtzum, of the light and life force that issue from the infinite Ein Sof light. Kedei shetuchal leislabesh b'ma'aseh mitzvahs, thus enabling it to become vested in the performance of the commandments. Sherubon kechulam hein bidvarim chumrim, practically all of which involve material things. Ruban kekulam, the vast majority of the mitzvahs, almost all of them, are connected with material items. For example, he says, ketzitzis, tefillin, karbanos, tzedakah, such as the tzitzis that we wear, made out of wool, tefillin that we don, karbanot, the offerings, the sacrifices, the tzedakah, the charity that we give. It's all about physical things. So they are certainly limited. They have physical limitations. Ve'af mitzvahs she'en beruchnius adam kemo yira ve'ava, even mitzvahs, those commandments that involve man's spirit, such as awe and love of God, which are not limited, are not physical. They're not physical. It's a spiritual thing. You love, you fear of God. Nevertheless, those are also limited. Because if you would have limitless love to Hashem, you wouldn't be here. You would become expired. Your neshama will expire. That's what Alter Rebbe says. Even those spiritual mitzvahs, they're also of limited measure, and by no means of infinite extent. Ki ahava rabba LaHashem bli keitz gvul mida ein adam yochel leseiv lebeliboi v'liyo iskayim begufa efilu rega. For not even for a moment could man sustain in his heart so intense of love of God as is without end and limitation, and still remain in existence in his body. We once told the story of the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe came to Mezrich to learn Chassidus, the Mezricher Magid, his teacher, put him up, his son, Reb Avram, they called him Reb Avram HaMalach, Avram the angel, because he was such a holy man. And he was teaching the Alter Rebbe Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe was teaching him Gemara. And I'm sure not that he didn't know Gemara, he knew very well, but the Alter Rebbe's teaching was much, much greater level. In any case, and there was one time that the Alter Rebbe noticed about Avram HaMalach, when he was teaching this Chassidus, he became so completely immersed into these teachings, the spiritual, mystical teachings, and he realized that his neshama is almost going out, and he took a bagel with butter and he stuck it into his mouth to bring him back to reality, back to this physical world. Because when your heart fills with love and spirituality, the neshama senses such great spirituality to an extent that the body cannot contain this great spiritual experience. And this is really what happened also by Matan Torah. When the Jewish people, when we all stood in the Mount Sinai, God, the first two commandments, God spoke to us directly. When we experienced that, hearing God, the words of Hashem, this caused such a great love and awe to Hashem that our souls literally departed. God had to revive us again. Why did Hashem do it? It's a story for another day. In order for us to have at least that experience, and subconsciously we are still having it. And that's what Alter Rebbe continues to explain. The Alter Rebbe k'may marazal shebishas matan Torah shoyse is galus lekuse is borech v'oirin soif baruch hu b'chinas dibur v'is galus pocha nishmas anechulu. So it was taught by our sages of blessed memory that at the time of the giving of the Torah, when God's divinity and the infinite Ein Sof light were manifested to the Jews at Sinai, at the direct level of revealed speech, their souls took flight from their bodies. And God had to revive us again. That's the end of yesterday's lesson, and we continue in today's lesson, which is Sunday, the first day of Elul. Continues the Alter Rebbe, והנה לפי שהמצווה ניתנו לנו על ידי הסלבשוס במידת גבורה וצמצום וכו'. And now the Alter Rebbe says, because the commandments were given to us by being vested in the attribute of Gevura, the contraction, and by the contraction of the divine radiance. That is why the Alter Rebbe says, all of the mitzvahs, they have limitations. L'chein roiv ha-mitzvahs, the majority of the mitzvahs, most commandments, yesh lem shiur metzumtzum. They have a delimited measure. Kemoi, for example, oirech ha-tzitzis yud beis gudlin. For instance, the length of the tzitzis must be 12 times the width of a thumb. That's the limit. If it's less than that, it's not kosher. If it's more than that, it doesn't make it more kosher. That's the limit. That tefillin etzba'aim al etzba'aim, and the tefillin, they need to have at least 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths. Umerubois dafke, and they must be exactly, necessarily, they need to be square. Ve'alulav, another example, the mitzvah of the lulav that we shake on Sukkos. Dalad tfachim. The lulav needs to have the hand breadth. It has to be at least 4 hand breadths. Why? Because next to the lulav you have the hadassim and the haravas, the willow and the willow branches and the myrtle branches, and the lulav needs to stick out. They need to be 3 tfachim. The lulav needs to stick out 1 tefach, 1 hand breadth. Ve'asukkah zayin tfachim. How big? What's the minimum measurement of the sukkah? Needs to have at least 7 hand breadth, which is very tiny. It's just enough for 1 person to squeeze in there. Ve'ashofar tefach, and the shofar that we just sounded, the minimum measure of a shofar needs to be a tefach, this size. Why? Because you need to see, and you shouldn't. If you be less, and you make the sound, it sounds like you're making the sound of your mouth. You want to make sure that you have a shofar is at least a tefach, so you can see that you're sounding the shofar. Ve'amikveh mem sa'ah, to immerse yourself in a mikveh, has to have a measurement of at least 40 sa'ah, which is a liquid measurement. V'chein korbanos yesh lem tzimtzum shiur metzumtzum lezman. And the sacrifice, they have a limited measure as regards of age. When you bring an offering, it has limitation. What is the age of the animal? Kemoi, for example, the Torah says, Kevasim b'nei shana, sheep of 1 year old, ve'elim b'nei shtayim, and rams of 2 years old, forim, chulu, and oxen, etc. And the same thing as we mentioned in the beginning, the mitzvah of tzedakah, giving charity. The same applies to the act of charity and the practice of kindness with one's money. Those have limitations. And he mentions kindness with one's money, because you can be kind in many other ways. To be kind, smile to people, be acting nice to people, helping people, and these things don't have limitations. But when it comes to money, how much money you should give, those in the original law does have limitations. Don't give more than 20%. And although the charity as we mentioned in the previous letters, the previous part of the Tanya, that charity is the foundation of the world, because God acted charitable when he created the world, and by us acting charitable, we are bringing those kindness of Hashem to draw down again. That's nevertheless, it is limited. Again, says the Alter Rebbe, even though that is one of the pillars upon which the world stands, is the three pillars: pillar of the charity, pillar of the Torah, and the pillar of prayer. As it is written, the world is built by chesed, by kindness. Nevertheless, nevertheless, it has a set measure of preferably 1/5 of one's income. One desires to perform the commandments in the best possible manner. And 1/10 of one's for an average measure. This is what is called the chesed of the world. The chesed that God brings through the Torah, through the mitzvahs, through the world, to sustain the world. The kindness that we do to bring down and draw down Hashem's kindness. Pirush chesed keil kol hayoim. This means the chesed of God that endures throughout the day, which is vested in the higher and lower worlds, through the arousal from below that is generated by man's service. So when we give tzedakah, when we act charitable, we draw down the kindness of Hashem through all the worlds. Meaning, by the precepts of charity and the kindness that people practice for each other. Now, however, because the world is finite and measured, from the earth to heavens, there is a distance of 500 years, and likewise from one heaven to another. It's spiritual terms, but still there are limitations to this world. And the world, the 6,000 years shall the world exist. Getting close to the end of it, we had 5,782. Therefore, nitan shiru midah gam ken lemitzvos tzedakah ve'chesed shebetorah. The Torah commandments of charity and kindness is also given a limit and measure. As are the other commandments of the Torah, they all have limitations. So now, that's it. The Rebbe explains why the tzedakah has a limit. Because the mitzvahs have a limit, the world is limited, everything is limited. However, says the Alter Rebbe, this is all nice and good and dandy if everything would go smooth according to the way it's supposed to be. If we all would be following God's commandments to the T, if everything would be nice, we would do everything, then the mitzvahs would be acting, we would be doing the mitzvahs in a regular way, drawing down Hashem's kindness in a measured way, whatever measure we need. The problem is, however, that we're not perfect. And when we're saying we're not perfect, people commit sins. And when you do something, you cause damage. There is, the Alter Rebbe explains in the Igeret that there is sins that is caused by prohibitions. Those cause damage. And there are sins of not doing positive commandments. Now, which one is easier to forgive? We said the positive commandments is easier to forgive. As soon as if a person missed prayer, missed doing something, missed studying Torah at one moment, and missed saying Shema, whatever, as soon as a person changes his heart and he says, Hashem, I'm going to be good. I regret. I ask for forgiveness. God forgives right away. Negative commandments, if a person violated, he ate something not kosher, or he did something on Shabbos that he's not supposed to do, whatever, it takes till Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur will clean. However, there is something about the positive commandments that you miss something that can never be fixed, in a way. And what is it? The negative commandments, if you do against Hashem's will and you regret and you ask Hashem and Hashem forgives and Yom Kippur, then everything is fine and good. But if a person misses to do something positive, Hashem gave you a certain amount of days, and He tells you every day say Shema in the morning and at night. Now you missed one day. You didn't do it one day. And say, Hashem, please forgive me, I'm going to do it from now on. Fine, you're going to do it from now on. But what about the day that you missed? And that says, there's a verse that says in the Torah, Me'uves lo yuchalitkan. The crooked one can never fix, because you cannot bring that day back. Here says the Alter Rebbe. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, in the ordinary system, the way God created the world in a measured way, and the measured way that we bring down, the normal way, the light that each mitzvah brings down, in that way, there's no way you can fix the day that passed. In order to be able to fix it, you need to reach deeper into you, and therefore you will reach deeper into God, in the level of God, the way He's above the limitations of the world, and to draw a light which is greater than the light that comes in a measured way. And that is the only way to fix. That is why, as the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, the need for unlimited amount of tzedakah. Continues the Alter Rebbe. However, this limitation on charity applies only to one who observes the Torah and does not depart from it to the right or left, even as much as a hair's breadth. But as to him who has strayed from the path, heaven forfend, inasmuch as he distorted his course, thus diminishing the supreme holiness. As we said, with every mitzvah you draw down the supreme holiness, and now you diminished by missing one mitzvah. You cannot go back. That is, he has diminished its value as regards to the efflux, the drawing down of the light, that he could have elicited from God's divinity, and the radiance he could have elicited from the infinite Ein Sof light, had he observed the Torah and fulfilled it as required. Such distortion cannot be rectified. Except by the flux of the supreme light that transcends the worlds without being vested in them. This is what is called the chesed ilo, the superior kindness, and rav chesed, the abundant kindness. Because it radiates and diffuses infinitely without limit and measure. Since it is not contracted within the world, but encompasses them from above in equal measure. From the peak of all wrongs to the end of all wrongs. v'isarusa de le'exata. Now when man draws it downward by means of his deeds and by an arousal from below, azai oir elyon ze meir mispashe toicha elamis umetaken kol me'uveis v'chol megrois shenitnu b'kodesh elyon. And this supreme light then radiates and extends within the worlds, rectifying all distortions and deficiencies caused in the Kodesh Elyon, in the higher holy. You rectify it by drawing down a bigger light. And renewing their light and goodness with an intense elevation of the level of a truly new light. And that is why this is why our sages taught that in the place, meaning at the level, where a Baal Tshuva stands, a penitent, one who repents, even the perfectly righteous do not stand. They do not stand, they cannot stand in this level. Because a Baal Tshuva reaches deep, deep, deep into his heart, and therefore he elicits a higher, deeper light that is not within the realms of the world. It goes beyond. This is the end of today's share. This is connected also, of course, with this month that today is Rosh Chodesh Elul. Chodesh Elul is the month of Teshuvah, the month that Hashem is close to us. He empowers us to become Ani ledodi, I am to my beloved, v'dodi li. Turn Hashem is to us. Hashem empowers us to get closer. Like we said before, God is like a king in the field, approachable. And therefore we can reach deep into ourselves with Teshuvah and bring the light of Hashem into this world, into ourselves, into our lives, and we should all have a ksiva v'chasima teva and have a wonderful day. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow.